And welcome to Microsoft Advertising Insights. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Richard Hammond, CEO and co-founder of Uncrowd. Richard has been in the retail industry for over 35 years and is the author of Smart Retail and most recently, Friction versus Reward. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. I just also wanted to point out that Uncrowd was this year's Microsoft Startup Partner of the Year for 2020. So congratulations, Uncrowd, and welcome, Richard.
Thank you very much. I've got the trophy on the desk coincidentally. So there you go. There's the Microsoft evidence. But yeah, no, it's great to be recording with you today, Tina.
Wonderful. Right. So, Richard, let's get stuck in. So as a leveler, can you introduce what we mean by friction and reward? And I suppose in the eyes of a retailer, but also as a shopper.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll wind it back a little bit to kind of the start of this journey, which is that I've always been obsessed with trying to understand why somebody would choose one retailer instead of another. And it started when I was 15 in the mid 80s, working in a consumer electronics store, and we had waves of people waving cash at us, trying to buy from us that Christmas. And I just found myself in the middle of it thinking, why are they bringing that money here? There are other places they can buy the stuff we do. That obsession stayed with me for decades. And a few years ago, I wrote the last version of my Smart Retail book. And I decided I wanted to find an answer to that question. I wanted to understand, can we as retailers understand why somebody might choose this option instead of this option in terms of the retailer itself? So not so much about necessarily in store, but what makes somebody go to Safeway instead of Kroger's? What makes somebody go to Tesco instead of the Co-op? And I looked for a metric. And we dug into things like customer satisfaction, things like effort scores and so on. I looked everywhere. And it became clear there wasn't one. And I thought from an academic perspective, I should find out why that is, why there wasn't a metric and whether or not we could create one and construct one. Long story short, we did. And the metric that we built is based on the two words you've just introduced there, friction and reward. And we'll refer to that as shopping effort versus purchase gain, for example. It's really looking at two measurable sets of observable variables. Friction is everything a customer has to go through to fulfill their mission with a particular retailer. So, for example, if I choose to buy, that lovely trophy I just showed you, if I wanted to get that trophy from a store that sells me trophies to engage, there are certain frictions in me getting in my car, visiting that place. But there are also certain rewards, like I've got the person in front of me. I can touch and feel the options. I can actually explain to them why I want a certain font the way it might be. I can choose and look at plinths and base and tops together. So there are certain gains that I make from choosing that channel versus certain frictions I've had to go through. If I decided to order it online instead, for example, my frictions are much lower. I don't have to travel anywhere. I can open up a browser, get straight on with it. But actually some of my reward is more limited. So I might have to wait a day for it to arrive. I might have to strain quite hard to work out what the relative size of the thing is. How's it going to feel in the hand of the recipient when it's handed over? And actually that's 3 kilos that, so we're delighted that Microsoft posted that to us. But it's that understanding of the combination of those two sets of realities, friction and reward. If I can identify those two things, then I can start to build a comparison for myself. So, for one of your clients, one of your advertisers, for example, they might want to think about for every grain of effort that one of their end customers might have to put in, what is that customer gaining from choosing to put that in with them? And that can apply to an ad campaign just as much as it can apply to comparing two retailers, for example. So if in your campaign you're asking quite a lot of the customer to fill in a survey or to enter a competition or to go and look at some information, each one of those things has a debt of friction to it. what you then have to make sure you do is balance that debt with a form of reward. So the classic one might be that there is a high value and a high likelihood of winning something, or gaining a voucher, or getting a discount, or whatever it might be, or that you're introducing them to something extraordinary that's going to improve their life. So if they're very straightforward and easy and redeemable and understandable and the offer's clear, those are all friction items. On the reward side, not only the value of the reward, but is it a process where I might discover something new? I might be inspired. Those are reward items as well. I might experience extraordinary service and so on. So it's a long answer, Tina, for you there, but friction is everything the customer has to push through, and reward is everything they gain from having done so.
Amazing. And can you give me an example of a brand or a retailer, whether it's bricks and mortar or online, who's actually doing this reward concept well?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of good examples. One of my favourite is Williams-Sonoma. And one of the great things about Williams-Sonoma is that essentially everything that Williams-Sonoma can sell you could be sourced elsewhere. So you can find those ingredients, those pots and pans, those kitchen equipment. What Williams-Sonoma do, though, is they really load the reward side. And they load the reward side in terms of not just the experience. So, you know, at Halloween and Thanksgiving, you walk into a Williams-Sonoma and you're bombarded by the smell of pumpkin. And there'll be somebody actually making a lovely, pumpkin side on the stove, and your senses will be hit. And that's all reward. That's all part of a gain from being in a physical space. The way that Williams-Sonoma talk to you is incredible. There's one that I love, which is an example of a display they had a few years ago where it was very expensive cooking pans. So you think the least interesting thing I could want to buy, just pots and pans to cook with. But the sign above it said, "These are the pans you'll pass on to your children." And all of a sudden, what it was doing in its communication was adding value, was delivering reward. It was saying, you're not just here to buy a set of pots and pans. You're here for immortality, longevity, for your legacy. An incredible idea, but that's one of the things that Williams-Sonoma do so well. But they're also a good example because they translate it online superbly. So they're a great example of a business that are terrific at building demand through physical experiences, terrific at showing people how you can build a Williams-Sonoma life, but also making sure that you can fulfill that very simply and straightforwardly through through online channels with Williams-Sonoma. And they were one of the first of the traditional American retailers to get to a 50-50 revenue model, where they're 50% physical in store and 50% online. But they will tell you that they've been able to understand that the physical reality really informs the volume of sales they get through the online part of the business. And we see that quite a lot, incidentally, is what used to be termed pure play online retailers finding a physical voice for themselves, like Warby Parker, like Bonobos, and like Amazon, of course, with their grocery offers, where that recognition that the reward side of the equation is so powerful, it's worth investing in what some people have written off in the past, although COVID has shown that actually physical is very much here to stay. Global Data and Amazon did some joint research on the state of physical and online retail over the first lockdown, and discovered in the UK, the US, France and Germany that at no point did online volumes even cross 50% of total retail activity during a total lockdown in some countries. That's an extraordinary idea, isn't it? That we were still, grocery makes up a big part of the Live 50, of course it does. But even in that catastrophe of a pandemic, that balance stayed quite strongly in the favour of physical. What we fall into as retailers is we get overexcited by the new. We over-index the value of the new, and we always have done. That's what we do as a species. And so it means that we believe narratives that talk about physical retail having had its day and falling away, when the reality is, and this is one of the things that people like Microsoft are really delivering tools to enable, is that a blended reality is what we're moving towards, where customers are able to move seamlessly through channels because customers aren't even thinking about them as channels. So it's, oh, I need a plinth to put my trophy on. I need a box to put it on. Well, actually, I know the dimensions. I might as well go a really low friction route. Boom, boom, boom. I'll search it on Bing, and I might find it at Amazon, fabulous, or I might even find a local trader has stock, and then that weigh up between, do I just order the one that looks fine, and that balance between that friction and reward, that relationship determines my choice. What COVID does in the short and medium term is it adds a lot on the friction side. So it suddenly means that safety, which is a friction variable, safety over indexes for a period of time, because we can see people that we know get ill. We can see the numbers on the news. We know that safety is an issue. So depending on mindset types, that safety variable becomes quite a big deal. And so does trust as well, incidentally. So not only is it physically obvious that a retailer is looking after my safety, do I trust them to do so? So those combinations have that short-term impact on us around COVID and the pandemic, but long-term, no, we will revert to the mean. The mean is moving all the time, but we will come back to meet it.
You think people will revert in some way to how behaviour was before, but obviously, the high street has been heavily impacted through COVID-19. But do you see that will come full circle at some point, and we'll start to, the high street will start to thrive again, and there will be a shift from online to more in store?
The shift to online will continue. So online volumes will continue to grow. And there's been a little bit of an acceleration in that. What will happen is what's happened in the past, which is there's a great exemplar for this, where when Walmart would first march through kind of the Midwest in particular, where they would bring a Walmart to a small traditional town, it would destroy Main Street. So mom and pop stores would disappear. It was the equivalent of a virus, not in a bad way, but in terms of its efficacy. I'm a big fan of Walmart. Walmart would arrive and customers would make their own judgment of the equation between friction and reward, which would be, my friction is low because I can park, it's easy, there's space, there's a lot of choice. And my reward's quite high because there's some products that I don't see in my local stores. I can buy them in different sizes. I've got a lot more choice in all those things are a reward side. And so what happened was that those main streets were devastated. And there was a point where you could buy 25 years ago, you could buy a lovely sized store unit on Main Street in one of those typical kind of 20,000 person towns for $5,000, the freehold. And within 10 years, you would have to pay $40,000 to rent that same space because it came back. Because what happened was that those stores that were killed by that change, that sudden violent change to their ecosystem, couldn't adapt. And it was sad. But Sam Walton himself, when he opened a new store in a town like that, he would say to the local traders, there are things that you can do that I can't. Your job is to work out what those things are, get even better at them, but also get really good at telling people you do them. And in Europe, for example, before COVID, in the 7 years before, so to 2020, we've opened more bookshops than we've closed in Europe. Yeah, those kind of businesses, they come back. And what's going to happen with COVID is that two types of businesses have suffered, physical retailers have suffered. Those that were weak in the first place, and we've got to be honest about that. The more tragic victims are those independent retailers who just don't have the cash reserves to last something like this. And you implore governments in those situations to support those kind of businesses because they're viable when things are back to normal. And the impact on hospitality and particularly independent bars, independent retailers has been awful. But others will rise in their place, and hopefully those original people will get a chance to again. And my heart breaks for those proprietors.
Okay, so let's talk about brand loyalty. So we have, from our search data, we've seen a lot of people come online through the last 8 months, and actually a lot of the over 65-year-olds. I mean, my 85-year-old mother has also started shopping online finally. But what we've seen from our data is people have sort of shifting from that traditional brand loyalty viewpoint to actually getting the quickest delivery or the cheapest deal or whatever it is. But there's been a massive drive of instant gratification. So what can brands do to, I suppose, dial up that reward piece? And I'm thinking online, but there may be learnings from bricks and mortar to create that brand loyalty effect.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing because we live in what I would characterize now as a choice economy. So like never before in human history, we have two things. We have massive visibility of our choices, and we have safe and easy access to those choices. So to be able to search for an alternative and find an alternative, but also find an alternative that has some status of trust around it. So a trader through Etsy, or a supplier through eBay, or somebody in the marketplace on Amazon, they're already safe. Or somebody who is protected because the payment system they use is a Visa or MasterCard, a part of making us feel comfortable about dipping into that space, or have been recommended by the search provider by Bing or alternatives. That means that loyalty is essentially a victim of that choice economy, because it's so easy to choose and so easy to choose away. Now, there's a split here. Retailers, we don't have any customer loyalty at all. It simply doesn't exist. Brands can have huge amounts of loyalty. And the way I'd characterize that is you could have two people have a physical fist fight over their preference for Coca-Cola versus Pepsi. But where they buy it from, neither give a monkeys, neither care. I'll buy it from Shaw's, I'll buy it from the gas station, I'll buy it from a drugstore. I don't care. But the brand, the loyalty between those two is dramatic. And so when we're working with brands, we do work on increasing loyalty. We are able to say, okay, for these types of mindsets and these types of missions, the things that the people in those mindsets are trying to achieve, these are the things you can do to make those people see you in a more and more positive light. And it is about balancing off reward and friction. When it comes to retailers, we have to be honest with them and level with them and say, you have to make sure you have the optimum combination of friction and reward for any given situation, and treat each customer as if they've just come to you for the first time, because that's kind of what they've done. For a retailer, it's about achieving something we call first bite of the cherry. And a great example in search is that, as we all know, appearing on the first page high up, that gives you an incredibly valuable pole position. That gives you a better chance of getting that, fulfilling that. It's the same with understanding friction and reward. If you can be the combination that means that most often you're the one that customer chooses, then that's the key to understanding how loyalty works for a retailer.
Amazing, thank you. So the other piece that you just mentioned was trust.
Yeah.
One of the data points that we talk about a lot is that 85% of consumers say they'll only consider a brand if they trust it.
Yeah.
So it's really core, and the way we advise our marketing clients that trust should be a really core element of their brand strategy.
It's a really good example of how these variables work, because trust actually appears on both sides of the friction reward equation. So how much trust do I implicitly as a customer have in a brand or a retailer? That's a friction item, because if my trust is low, it takes a lot for me to go that direction. If my trust is high, then it reduces my friction. On the reward side, there's also trust delivered. So does that retailer routinely deliver on the promise that they make to me as somebody who trusts them? Those two things are part of because the thing about friction and reward is they interrelate. It's the balance between the two. People will shop a high friction, awkward, difficult experience if the reward is high enough. But equally, if friction is very low, but there's not an awful lot of reward, quite often, frankly, that's one that Amazon will win 9 times out of 10. What you need to know about trust as a vendor, as one of your kind of viewers might be thinking about it, is if you can build high trust, that's already a very strong friction reducer. So that's you're absolutely right. That's the best policy. If your trust is low, the first medicine is to try and build that trust level up. But actually, what you're also able to do with a platform like ours, or frankly, if you sit down with a piece of paper and a pen and work out what your frictions and your rewards are, you can start to say, okay, if my trust is low, where do I have to compensate? Do I have to deliver in reward, or do I have to improve frictions elsewhere?
So what are your top tips for online retailers? What can they do to reduce friction? And I mean, you've given already some great tips around raising the bar and in reward. But if we think long term and think about post-COVID as well, what can retailers and online retailers do to drive more value?
Yeah. So the biggest challenge for online retailers, pure online retailers, is acquisition cost. And acquisition cost can be we all know the numbers from Wayfair, for example, and Wayfair have managed to leverage that incredible investment in acquisition costs so powerfully. It becomes difficult to compete against. So what you then have to do is look at, okay, for those people who do find me for my acquisition budget, I need to make sure that I don't trip up each time I look after them. So all that money I've invested in acquisition, I need to make sure that it's easy to get into my space, it's easy to search it, that it's easy for us to inspire customers, it's easy to create discovery. And that's too often one of the things that an online retailer struggles to understand the value of in many ways, is how to differentiate the way you present product to a customer who's just found you. So they've searched for something, they've found you on Bing, they're going to give you a chance, they've come through. You've got one opportunity then to, in a low friction way, get them to the thing that they want to see, and in a high reward manner to present that thing to them in a way that really makes them want to interact with you and it. And that's the key in all of this, because, and again, one of the reasons why tools like ours needed to exist is that traditionally, if you're an e-commerce marketer, you're sitting there and you're saying, I know animating my listings is a nice thing to do, but I have no metric to show the business the return on investment for that. And that's one of the things that a comparison like friction reward does, because you can directly attribute increasing discovery theatre, increasing inspiration, increasing interactivity and engagement. You can directly show how that has an impact on the likelihood of that customer to convert with you or not. So online, absolutely, get as low friction as possible. That's the mantra of being an online retailer, is low friction is critical. And really think about that differentiation. What can you do for people on certain missions that both reduces their friction and increases the reward with you? And then in physical stores, again, it's about saying, what can I do in the combination of those friction and reward measures that gives me a better combination than my rivals? And really, it's about almost, we talk about the search equivalent of being at the top of the page. The physical equivalent of that is somebody parking their car at your end of town, somebody getting off the bus nearer your store than the other stop, somebody choosing the entrance to the mall, which is the one where you're closest to. That first bite of the cherry is so critical, both online and offline. And so anything you can do in service of that, but to do it, you need to understand, what are people trying to do and what mood are they in when they're trying to do it? If you crack that, doesn't matter whether you're online or offline, you can then start to optimize friction and reward to win against your rivals.
Thank you, Richard, for joining us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for asking us, Tina.